Ghana, the black star of Africa. The United States just slapped flat 15% tariff on Ghana and most African countries. But here's the twist. This could be the catalyst that finally transforms Africa into the world's next economic superpower. What's up, everyone? Welcome. I'm your host, and today we're breaking down the biggest trade story to hit Africa in decades. This isn't just about tariffs. We're potentially witnessing the beginning of Africa's complete economic realignment away from the West and toward true continental integration. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because this story is developing rapidly, and the implications will reshape global trade for the next generation. Let's start with what just happened. Ghana, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Uganda, Mozambique, Mauritius, Malawi, Lesotho, and Madagascar all got hit with a flat 15% tariff overnight. South Africa and Libya got hammered even harder with 30% tariffs. To understand how massive this is, AGOA has been the foundation of modern U.S.-Africa trade relationships for 25 years. It allowed 32 African countries to export goods to America completely duty-free. Textiles from Lesotho, oil from Nigeria, cocoa from Ghana, all of it flowed to American markets without tariffs. That era will be ending by September 2025. The Trump administration replaced decades of preferential access with what they're calling reciprocal tariffs. Basically, if your country charges us, we charge you back, plus extra. Ghana is particularly vulnerable here, and that's why this story matters so much. Ghana's economy has been built around exports: cocoa, gold, oil, textiles, and increasingly manufactured goods. Suddenly, all of Ghana's exports to America are 15% more expensive overnight. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of panic, we're seeing something completely different from Ghana and other African countries. They're saying, fine, if America doesn't want to trade with us fairly, we'll build our own economic bloc. The numbers tell the story. Currently, intra-African trade represents only about 15% of total African trade. Compare that to Europe at 69% or Asia at 59%. Africa has been massively under-trading with itself, instead sending raw materials to America and Europe and buying back finished products. Trump's tariffs might have just given Africa the push it needed to change this fundamental dynamic. Ghana is already pivoting hard toward AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and what's happening could be the beginning of Africa's economic independence. Here's where this gets really exciting. AfCFTA creates a single market of 1.3 billion people across 54 countries, with a combined GDP of over $3 trillion. When you think about it, that's not just a replacement for American markets, it's potentially much bigger. African countries are accelerating AfCFTA integration in direct response to these tariffs. Instead of shipping cocoa beans to America, Ghana could be processing chocolate domestically and selling it across Africa. Instead of exporting raw materials and importing finished goods, African countries could be building regional value chains. The strategic shift is already happening. According to recent reports, African nations are not just advancing AfCFTA integration, they're also shifting trade toward China and the EU. This is economic realignment in real time. Think about what this means practically. Ghana's cocoa doesn't need American processors. It could supply chocolate factories in Nigeria, Kenya, or South Africa. Ghana's gold doesn't need London refineries. It could supply jewelry manufacturers across the continent. Ghana's textiles don't need American consumers. They could clothe 1.3 billion Africans. The infrastructure is already being built. China's Belt and Road Initiative has been investing heavily in African transportation and logistics. The AfCFTA framework provides the legal structure. Trump's tariffs might have just provided the economic incentive that makes it all click into place. What we're witnessing isn't just about Africa and America. This is part of a massive global trade realignment. Trump's tariffs are hitting 23 countries so far, including 30% duties on the European Union and Mexico. America is essentially declaring economic war on the rest of the world. But here's the fascinating part. While America builds walls, the rest of the world is building bridges. Africa is turning toward China, which is already Africa's largest trading partner. They're strengthening ties with the European Union, which is looking for new partnerships as they face their own challenges with America. The timing couldn't be better for Africa. China needs raw materials and has the manufacturing capacity to add value to African resources. Europe needs new markets and trading partners. Africa has the resources, the population, and increasingly, the political will to be a major player. We're potentially looking at a world where America becomes increasingly isolated, while Africa, Asia, and Europe build stronger relationships with each other. Trump's America First policy might end up being America alone. Here's why Ghana and other African countries are treating this crisis as an opportunity. For decades, African economies have been structured to serve external markets, export raw materials, import finished goods. This colonial-era economic model has kept African countries dependent and vulnerable to exactly these kinds of external shocks. But AfCFTA offers a different path. Instead of depending on American or European markets, Africa could be building an internal market that's larger than either. Instead of exporting raw materials and importing finished goods, Africa could be adding value domestically and regionally. The math is compelling. Africa has 30% of the world's mineral resources, 12% of global oil reserves, 60% of the world's unused arable land, and the youngest population of any continent. All the ingredients for an economic powerhouse are there. It's been the integration that's been missing. Ghana is positioning itself as a gateway and hub for this new African economy. With its relatively stable political environment, strategic location, and growing manufacturing sector, Ghana could become the Singapore of West Africa in this new economic order. Now let's be realistic about the challenges. Building continental integration isn't easy. Africa still faces infrastructure gaps, currency issues, and political instability in some regions. The immediate impact of losing American markets will be painful for countries like Ghana that have built their export strategies around U.S. demand. There's also the question of whether African countries can move fast enough to offset the losses from American tariffs. Building new supply chains, developing processing capabilities, and establishing new trade relationships takes time. Companies that were exporting to America can't just flip a switch and start selling to Nigeria or Kenya overnight. But here's what's encouraging. The response from African leaders has been swift and coordinated. Instead of begging America to reconsider, they're doubling down on African integration. Instead of trying to maintain the old colonial trade patterns, they're building new ones. The crisis is also forcing innovation. Countries that never prioritized intra-African trade are suddenly exploring new partnerships. Businesses that focused on Western markets are discovering opportunities they never knew existed on their own continent. So what should we expect in the coming months? First, we'll likely see accelerated AfCFTA implementation. Countries that were moving slowly on continental integration now have urgent economic reasons to speed up the process. Second, expect to see major infrastructure investments as countries prepare for increased intra-African trade. Ports, roads, railways, and digital infrastructure will all need upgrading to handle new trade patterns. Third, we'll probably see new financial arrangements. African countries will need payment systems that don't depend on US dollars or Western banking systems. The African Development Bank and other continental financial institutions could become much more important. Fourth, expect retaliation. African countries aren't just going to absorb these tariffs quietly. We're already seeing discussions about reciprocal measures against American goods and services. Finally, watch for the diplomatic fallout. America's relationships with African countries, built over decades, could be fundamentally damaged by this economic aggression. That creates opportunities for China, Europe, and other powers to strengthen their positions in Africa. Here's the bottom line. Trump's 15% tariff on Ghana and the end of AGOA could be remembered as the moment Africa finally broke free from economic colonialism and built its own prosperity. Yes, the immediate impact will be painful. Jobs will be lost, revenues will fall, and businesses will struggle. But if African countries can use this crisis to accelerate continental integration and reduce dependence on Western markets, we could be witnessing the birth of the world's next economic superpower. The question isn't whether Africa has the resources or the population to become a major economic bloc. It clearly does. The question is whether African leaders have the political will to make the hard choices necessary to build that integration. What do you think? Is this the push Africa needed to finally prioritize continental integration? Or will countries try to negotiate their way back into American markets? Have you seen evidence of increased African trade cooperation in your area? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this analysis helped you understand what's really happening behind the headlines, smash that like button and subscribe to AfCFTA News for more coverage of Africa's economic transformation. This is a historic moment, and we'll be covering every development. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.